Good afternoon, welcome to the Black Jersey. It's your boy Max hosting, and as you can see from the t-shirt by Severely Concussed, I am recording this video on the same day as the previous video because I'm a workhorse. I want to get videos done for you guys, and I've got an incredibly important topic to tackle about World Rugby's eligibility laws from the perspective of myself, a New Zealander. I'm going to start things off by saying this topic was kind of reignited after we smashed Tonga by 102-0, and before people say things about how Tonga could have beaten us, I don't think that ever would have happened, even if Tonga was fielding the first choice team. Tonga were not fielding a lot of their first choice players. They were fielding what I could call probably a C or a D team, but either way, I don't think the result would have been any different. The World Rugby eligibility laws, as they stand though, do need change now, because I'm getting quite aggrieved by the fact that a lot of countries are poaching players from other nations, specifically from the South Island, heading away to the north to play for the Northern Hemisphere countries and the Six Nations. So I'm going to look through the Six Nations squads of the 6 teams competing in that competition, and I'm also going to look at the Wallabies' current squad as well as our own current squad to delve into how many overseas-born players we have. And although it's a case-by-case scenario for who's kind of a New Zealander, who's kind of not, it is probably the only clean way I can analyze this. So without further ado, let's hop into it. So as you can see on screen, I've got an article from 2016 about the pay disparity between Fiji and England when they played each other in 2016 at Twickenham in the end of year tests for that year. So as you can see, England players do not actually have a salary from the national team, but at the time they were receiving match day bonus fees of £22,000, as opposed to their opponents from Fiji earning only £400. So that's a massive gap between the paying, and it shows off how rich the Rugby Football Union are and how much they rake in from having England as their national team. But when you actually get to today and the amount of overseas-born players representing England, only 4 of the 43 current England players from the Six Nations were born overseas. Sam Underhill, believe it or not, is from the USA. The Vunipola brothers, everyone knows about the fact that they were born in Australia and New Zealand respectively. And David Ribbons, who has undergone the 3-year stand down, was born in South Africa, but is now playing for England, and although he's uncapped, I counted him towards this because I was counting the full squads. It's a similar thing with France. Only 4 of the 48 French players were born overseas, so that's Bernard Leroux, Paul Willemse, both from South Africa, so you're already seeing a trend. It's the Southern Hemisphere nations being exploited by the North, in my opinion, whereas Veremi Vakatawa and Winnie Atonio were also born in New Zealand. Now, although these two teams have less than 1% of their squad born overseas, it starts to hit the wall just a little bit when you get into the other teams. So the stats for overseas born players from Ireland and Italy were a lot higher. So Ireland has 9 of their 44 players born overseas, and that includes Bundy Aki, who's a former Chiefs player, and I believe Bundy Aki would have absolutely been an All Black had he not moved to Ireland and debuted for them at the age of 27. Now, guys like Aki are very different to the likes of the Vunipola brothers. You see, the Vunipola brothers, although they were quite young when they moved to England, they were born there anyway, but they do have the accents, they do consider England their home, but then a Bundy Aki moving to Ireland for rugby is a very different case, because Bundy Aki still has a New Zealand accent, and although he now considers Ireland his home and he's immersed in the culture, he was lured there by Connacht to play for them and become a regular starter because the guy was looking for a lot more game time as he really wanted to support his family and he was sick of being a bank teller. So he's in a very different situation to the likes of those Vunipola brothers. So as I said, that's why it's a case-by-case scenario. And when you start to get into the higher percentages of overseas-born players, you start to see this happen more and more often, just like with Italy, because 10 of Italy's 42 players were born overseas, and that includes Monty Ioane. So Monty Ioane's Australian, and Pete Samu, who's a current Wallaby, and Digby Ioane, his namesake, are relatives of his, and both of them are former Wallabies or current Wallabies. I don't know, I can't remember if Samu's in the squad or not.
Uh-oh, retard alert! Retard alert, class!
But yeah, cases like those, as I said, are becoming more prevalent, as proven by Ioane's presence in the Italian squad. I must say though, Italy are improving, so I'm not going to give them a heck of a lot of grief in this video, so I'm going to move on to Wales, who have 12 of their 40 players born overseas, so that's a third of the squad, 30%. That is definitely getting a lot higher in percentages, which now brings me to Scotland, who I'm actually getting quite cross with and quite angry with, because Scotland had a 53-man squad including injury cover and apprentices for their Six Nations in 2021, and 23 of those 53 players were born overseas, so 43% of their squad was born overseas. Now with a lot of these Six Nations teams, you are having players born elsewhere in Europe. For example, Wales, Scotland, Ireland. They've got quite a lot of English-born players, such as the likes of an Ali Price. That's what happens in Europe, because all the countries in that continent are quite close together, so you do get a bit of that, and like the Vunipola brothers coming there as kids. But with Scotland, they also have cases such as Blade Thompson. Blade Thompson is a former Hurricane, and I remember when he was a Hurricane, he had quite a lot of injury issues, and there was no way, no offence to him, he was going to be an All Black, and I think deep down Blade Thompson knew that, so he went to play for the Scarlets in Wales, but for whatever reason, he was eligible for Scotland because of a grandparent or something, and so without even undergoing the 3-year ban, Scotland was somehow allowed to pick this guy who had never lived in the country. That's just wrong. Brad Shields, although he had English parents, had the same thing happen to him too. He got picked before he even moved to England. He's no longer playing Test rugby, but Brad Shields is another case of this scenario, and frankly, scenarios like these disgust me, because think of guys like, you know, Matt Fagerson, actually born in Scotland. They worked, they trained hard to earn their places in the squad, but once they reach the squad, they're having to give their spot up for a person who wasn't even born in the country and hasn't even lived there. I know that a lot of the other Six Nations countries do it legitimately, but selecting people based on heritage, no, that's wrong. You are a tier 1 nation. Leave New Zealand alone. Leave the Pacific Islands alone too. They're about to cap a guy called Sione Tuipulotu, who's currently playing in Japan and who's never lived in Scotland as well. And it's a horrific pattern, and it's just shocking to me how Scotland can pick players not born in their own country. Yes, I get you've only got 2 professional clubs, so just pick more players who are playing in England. Scotland actually have 17 of their current players playing club rugby in England. So just do more of that. Allow your guys to move to France. Allow them to go to Ireland. Just do more stuff like that and just keep picking them after they leave Edinburgh or they leave Glasgow. Now that I've finished talking about the Six Nations, we're going to look at the Wallabies, and although 19 of the current Wallabies do have Pacifica ancestry, their overseas-born players ratio is the lowest it's been in some time. The Wallabies only have 10 of their 38 players born overseas, so that equates to 26%. The Wallabies have in the past resorted to just straight up poaching, but they do have somewhat of a plan by the looks of things. They're looking to bid for the 2027 World Cup, and although they're not going to win a Bledisloe Cup again, they are at least trying to get the grassroots going again. Here's footage of Michael Checker visiting an amateur club, having a yarn with the kids, stuff like that. As long as Rugby Australia can keep doing stuff like that and at least try to get homegrown players, that would be pretty good. Even if these homegrown players do have Pacific ancestry, at least it's better than poaching like, Scotland. Now with the All Blacks, I'm quite disappointed by our own percentage of overseas-born players. Akira Ioane, although he has Kiwi parents and has lived basically his whole life here, Akira Ioane was born in Japan, so I'm going to count him amongst the 8 of these 38 players. So yes, 21% of the current All Blacks were born overseas, and personally I don't think that's good enough either. But I am happy to see Finlay Christie in there, so we can give a middle finger to Scotland for constantly poaching our players, so they can have a taste of their own medicine. Anyway, Nepo Laulala was born in Samoa, but went to school in New Zealand. Tyrell Lomax, born in Australia, went to school in New Zealand. Same thing with Aidan Ross, who's recently been called into the squad as cover. Ross is uncapped right now, but big congratulations to Ross for his call-up. I was hoping that was going to happen this year. Shannon Frazelle, as far as I'm aware, is the only one of our currently overseas-born players to have not attended school in New Zealand. Samasoni Taukei'aho, just like Frazelle, was also born in Tonga. Taukei'aho's uncapped though, but I will still count him. As I said, Akira Ioane's born in Japan, Finlay Christie's born in Scotland, and Sevu Reece, who is quite controversial amongst a few people, was born in Fiji and came to Hamilton Boys High, I think, as a year 12 student, so he would have been 16, 17 or so. My conclusion from all this is that it's not actually New Zealand and Australia who are at fault. They're actually losing a lot of the homegrown players to head up there to go see England, head up there to go see Ireland, go to Wales, go to Japan, all those other nations. And because we're having a lot of homegrown talent eaten away at, we're then going to have to look at Pacific options who have come here. So it's kind of a issue coming from the north as well. And the thing is, as time goes on, New Zealand Rugby is going to have to figure out a way to sort this thing out if the eligibility rules aren't changed. Because the thing is, a lot of the overseas-born clubs, such as Yamaha Jubilo in Japan, are owned by corporations. So the corporations have big money at their disposal. And even Wasps in England, although they're a private club, do have a hotel and nightclub, I believe. That's how they afforded Willie LaRue from South Africa. So the eligibility rules are going to have to change if we're going to sort something out. And because of all the players leaving overseas, Tonga and Samoa and Fiji, the 3 of them are at huge risk of this, because the thing is, Tonga, Fiji, Samoa are all very little countries with populations of less than 1 million. I've got the populations up here on screen for you to see, and so they're really going to have to do their best. And I think that something that would be in their interest would to be proposing a bill in World Rugby to put it through so that citizenship should be the defining factor in eligibility. And I think citizenship is possibly the best way to go forward. Like, as far as I'm aware, Nepo Laulala, Tyrell Lomax and so on are New Zealand citizens, so there would still be a few overseas-born players in the current All Blacks squad, but of course there likely wouldn't be room for a Shannon Frazelle or a Sevu Reece, so Tonga could then have Frazelle, Fiji could have Reece. It would not be the best thing, but it would definitely stop a lot of complications in this process, and I really hope World Rugby can get stuff together and find some kind of way to be more powerful than these corporations, because, you know, World Rugby I'd consider a corporation myself, and as a small business owner from the past, I do understand what it's like to be swallowed up by the bigger competition, so fingers crossed all this bigger competition can stop being so predatory towards a smaller competition in terms of business model, and hopefully things are going to get easier for the Pacific Island nations. Citizenship, it is the way forward, Anyway, that's the end of the video, guys. So thank you so much for subscribing and for looking at us. Thank you so much for buying from Severely Concussed and using the discount code I've got up here for 15% off your amazing products from these guys. Like the video, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. Go to Patreon, go to Instagram, and I'll talk to you again later, guys. See you later.